I hope you'll excuse the poor lighting. It's very hot where I am right now, and so it's very difficult to do good presentation. But I was looking through Facebook today when I saw someone talk about one of the factors they feel is in the decline of kimono as as a commonly worn and bought thing. And they had taken note of the fact that kimono wearing is currently facing a boom, partly thanks to the availability of used kimono that can be bought cheaply, and partly thanks to kimono rental services. However, they observed that there is a lot of women who have kimono sitting at home, with the store pre-stitching. Like, when I say store pre-stitching, I mean that all kimono, when you buy them brand new, will come with extra threads in the sleeves, in the hems, which you would take out when you begin to wear the kimono. And so even if you are in the used market, what you find is that there a remarkable number of kimono and kimono jackets in the used market still have these threads, implying that somebody bought the product probably out of a sense of obligation or as a gift, and then it was never actually worn. And the man who made the post quite rightly observed that if this is the case, this should strike terror in the hearts of kimono producers, because what it essentially means is that they're producing a product that women don't actually want to wear. And, this is not entirely an unfounded argument, because when I have gone kimono shopping myself, admittedly, my predominant reason for buying used kimono so much as I do is simply because I can't afford to commission brand new kimono. For me to feel like I could go ahead and do that, I would have to be tremendously wealthy, and I would probably still want some sort of translator to assist me on top of that, because I feel that somehow, how do I put this politely? The broader perception of the kimono industry, as in at its the broader cultural perception of kimono producers themselves, they're seen as being judgmental. They're seen as being somewhat irrelevant to how women actually live and think day to day. And so while there are some companies that, some fashion labels that are producing contemporary kimono and yukata, and they are finding great success, there's also typically what they've had to do this is to adapt their approach from being strictly traditionalist to being, somehow contemporized, whether it's, due to presenting their store more like an ordinary fashion store, or combining traditional Japanese practices with contemporary Western fashion practices. This strict traditionalism isn't coping, and it's not because people don't care about it. If it was that people didn't care, they wouldn't be buying these these kimono that they're leaving sitting in their closets unworn. What's really happening, I think, is that people are intimidated. They're afraid to approach kimono producers to get this done. Even as much as I love kimono, supposing I suddenly came into a massive amount of wealth right now, suddenly I was a billionaire and I could buy and commission any kimono I wanted, I would still feel hesitation in my heart about approaching traditionalist kimono producers. My first thought would be, oh, if I go, maybe they're going to try to make me buy something that I don't really like, rather than allowing me to pick the kimono to be whatever I want it to be. Maybe they're going to look down on me for being, foreign. Maybe they're, and even if I overcame all of these fears and trepidations, I wouldn't know where to go, really. I mean, I'm guessing I'd probably go to Gion and go into one of the kimono shops I've seen there and say, hey, I want to commission a kimono. Except even then, even with all the time I've spent with kimono, it's very hard for me to I would only feel comfortable commissioning a kimono from scratch if it was going to be a highly formal one. Like if I was getting married, or if I was going to die, or something like that. I would feel some sort of occasion would have to justify my buying of that kimono, because it is such a massive expense. And a lot of the kimono that I enjoy wearing day to day aren't silk. I actually really like wearing cotton kimono. Well, I'm going to try to reduce my use of synthetic kimono because I'm concerned about the environment. But yeah, if cotton and linen kimono became commonly available again, I would be much more interested in that than silk, because silk is so hard to maintain. And I suppose you could argue, well, sure, now if you were a billionaire, you could afford to maintain a silk kimono. You could afford to go to real kimono cleaners. But you know what I mean? That's the thing. Even as a billionaire, I would struggle to justify the expense. And I suppose, the people who produce traditionalist kimono would say, well, that just proves that you don't really love kimono enough. And you may be right about that, but the problem is, if you are trying to bring kimono back into common use, you can't just market it to people who already have an exorbitant love of it. You have to be willing to create permutations of kimono that are more like what people are used to commonly buying and wearing, unfortunately. And, you might want to say, well, doesn't that just mean that we'll end up throwing away all of our traditions? No, it doesn't, actually. One of the things I've tried to do in my own life is to try to look for new opportunities for how kimono could be preserved well into the future in terms of actually wearing. And when I looked around, what I saw is that there are ways that cultures can overcome a cultural prejudice and become popular, even though people might have reasons to not want to, to want to stay away from it. For example, long ago, probably back as recently as the 50s even, sandwiches were seen as a British food. Actually, maybe it might have been further back than that, but there was a point in American history where people did not like to eat sandwiches in America because they felt that the sandwich was too British. And so that, they sort of thought of it as a bad thing. But a point came, I think, in the mid-60s, where people were reviewing what they were going to feed school children day to day. And they found that and they wanted a solution that would not only be extremely cost-effective, but also extremely nutritious. And so the meal that they worked out would be the most efficient, the most cost-effective, the easiest to produce would be a cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. And as a result of this becoming common practice, it became normative for children all over America to have a sandwich with their lunch. And because this became normative for all of these children, even though it was a very cheap, arguably nasty you know, piece of cheese on white bread sandwich, no adornment, just that simple. People became interested in the concept of sandwiches. It normalized the concept of sandwiches for Americans. And so over time, they have felt comfortable experimenting with sandwiches and developing more complex versions of the sandwich. And people have become more interested in the actual origins of where sandwiches came from. And I think a similar thing can happen with kimono, where if we can find a very simple way that kimono can be worn by children as a normative product, not something specialist, not something, even necessarily closely related to Japanese culture, but some way of wearing kimono where it's the easiest, cheapest way to dress your kids. It will become common. Just like the sandwich, it'll become in common use, and then over time, people will feel comfortable evolving their own permutations of it, but also they'll become more interested in the original kimono because they will feel more comfortable with it. And, there's different options for this. I mean, I think the process in some ways has already begun in that, people for a long time just wore a type of kimono as a sort of bathrobe. And then, more recently there's been this trend of people wearing a type of kimono, well, they call it kimono, as jackets, but really it's more like hapi or howdy. But over time, I believe that they will go on to potentially, as a result of this, become more interested in real kimono. And, because of this trend, I was able to start selling people actual happy and howdy in Australia. And, admittedly, you're in a bit of a race against China in this regard, because China has started to wise up to what's going on, and they've started producing imitation howdy and happy, which is going to make things difficult. But the fact remains that people will still be interested in traditionally produced kimono, because there will be people who are interested in the original source. However, I think some concession has to be made for the fact that most people are not used to buying clothing in the style of kimono. As in, people expect to be able to walk into a shop and see a whole lot of already made garments or already made designs, and they expect to be able to point at it and say, oh, I want that one, please make it in a size 15, 14, and how long till I come back, and they're not used to the idea of having to be measured. As it is, even commissioning a garment is a weird process for most people, I find, because I do offer commissioning options in my store, and a lot of people, I mean, there is, because of the internet, there is some adaptation, but it's still, people are still getting used to the changes. And, but that's the thing, the internet is an underexplored opportunity for kimono producers. Because let me tell you, if it were possible for me to log on to a website and just order a simple iramuji from an actual kimono producer brand new, with a set price, set size, that would be very easy for me to do. And I would be very pleased to do it, because I could know that the silk is natural and therefore better for the environment, and know that my money is going to a real kimono producer instead of just going to China or something. I could know that I'm helping to preserve the industry. But that's the thing, that's because I'm used to buying clothes on the internet. I'm used to buying kimono on the internet. And like I said, if I wanted to go and commission a kimono right now, I would have a very tough time. And in fact, again, because kimono culture traditionalist kimono culture comes off as so exclusive and snobbish, I would still feel very uncomfortable, if I'm honest. Part of the reason I think the used kimono market is thriving isn't just because people aren't wearing their kimono and they're therefore giving it away. It's also because, you're looking at supply there, but the reason there's a demand is because people are very interested in the kimono, and they're even interested in learning how to wear it properly. But the traditional rules are just so strict and so tight that most normal people don't feel comfortable wearing them. The reason they're comfortable wearing used kimono is because with used kimono they feel a greater freedom to wear the kimono the way they want to. So even if they're trying to, a lot of them will still try to wear it traditionally, but because it's a used one that they bought without having to talk to an actual producer, they feel more comfortable. They feel more like they can wear it day to day however they want, instead of having to reserve it for just the right occasion. So again, I feel like one of the obstacles kimono producers might actually have to overcome is that cultural perception of snobbery and of having to deal with people imposing tight rules on you and being judgmental towards you. And, it is a question of marketing. It's very much a question of, well, how do you manage the fact that most people are afraid to even talk to you, because that's the first step. Before anyone's going to buy a kimono from you, they have to feel like they can at least talk to you about kimono in the first place without, feeling like an idiot or looking like an idiot. And, for a lot of people, again, that's going to be hard because kimono, again, is just so far from what most people are used to. Even if they really care about it, even if they really do want to support the industry, even if they really do want to go on and take it seriously later. And, if for a lot of people, I think that the used kimono market will actually become a conduit for them to become more comfortable with kimono so that they can go and buy the real thing later. Because, if I had never been able to buy used kimono and get comfortable with wearing them, I would have zero comfort or interest in going and buying a brand new one. I would be much too intimidated. The fact that I have had the time to familiarize myself with the conventions of dressing in kimono means that I feel like I can go and buy a commissioned one. However, it still remains the case that for some reason I feel like it's okay for me to wear a used kimono day to day. But I still would feel for some reason I would feel as though I would have to wait for just the right occasion to wear a new commissioned kimono. And I think it's because there is this cultural association between buying kimono the traditional way and having to comply with all of those rules and all of those traditions that again pertain to where do you wear a kimono, and having to worry about keeping it clean as well. So yeah, even if I did go and commission a kimono today, it probably would end up sitting in my closet not being worn for a very long period of time as I wait for just the right occasion to wear it. And yeah, even then I would still feel intimidated. I would still feel frightened to take it out and wear it because it would have been so expensive to produce and to obtain that I would be dreadfully afraid of staining it the whole time. So okay, again, maybe an avenue that silk producers can consider is, what can we do to make the silk easier to clean? And the truth is that some of the older kimono I have encountered, even though they're made of silk, when you get water on them, the fabric doesn't warp, the fabric doesn't shrink. And I think this is because they were woven differently. I think that the style of weaving means that, and so, again, that's something that can be looked at. Another thing you might want to consider is the fact that there's an increasing number of people who are vegan, and they are uncomfortable with wearing silk because, well, particularly new silk, because they feel sorry for the silk caterpillars. And, they're not happy that the caterpillars had to die in order to make their silk. So you might want to look into producing more raw silk kimono, as in silk where the worm has already left the cocoon alone. And there's also ethically produced types of silks that are coming out, piece silk. So I feel like these are options that the industry might do well to consider. But I realize that to a fastidious traditionalist, all of these suggestions I'm making are going to come across as bastardizations. They're going to come across as me looking at your culture and saying that it's somehow not good enough as it is. And that's not actually what I think. Actually, what I think is that in an ideal world, people would be getting to know your culture better and getting to understand it better by themselves without having to have this additional assistance. But the fact remains that they have no way in. They need help. And, even with all the years I've spent with kimono, I still feel like I would need help to commission a kimono from scratch. So, I can just imagine for most people in the world, it would be almost unthinkable. And, certainly you might want to argue, well, we don't want to market to everyone, we just want to market to a few wealthy people. Again, if you come across as too exclusive, even the wealthy will be afraid to talk to you. I'm sorry, but it's true. If people are afraid to buy from you, it's going to be very hard for them to say anything. And that's even if they really do care about your traditions and really do care about what you're doing and your work. So, with all due respect, you might have to consider just a little bit of wriggle room. This doesn't necessarily mean deviating from your culture, because the fact is that kimono as a culture has been evolving for a very long time, and I think that, this might just be, efforts towards the next phase of evolution. It doesn't necessarily have to be the end.